This is a story that begins far, far away, deep into the cosmos. We then enter the world of Symbiote. When we get here, we see a vile, harsh world. Then we are greeted by Venom pleading his life to Carnage. He begs him for another chance and to let him join his army. Carnage then threatens to kill Venom, but Venom pleads for his life. He then gives him 1 year to go find a perfect body. Venom takes the offer. Venom then smiles and makes his way out of the planet. He then leaves far into the cosmos, searching for a body. He then finds Earth. 3 weeks after searching, he then lands and makes his way to New Mexico, leaving a big crater there. He crawls out of the meteorite and makes his way on. We are now in New York. We see Peter Parker sitting on top of a building, contemplating on all the last guys that he beat. He thinks to himself, who will be the next villain? Some time passes and now we are in the late evening of New York. It is a big festival celebrating the wins of Spider-Man. There are plenty of festivities going on in the festival, but Spider-Man does not contribute into any of them. He just sits there on his phone, and then his spider senses tingle. Spider-Man then goes towards the action. Once he lands there, he notices that there are police cars everywhere. He sees that a bank has been robbed, and he goes to talk to the police to ask them exactly what happened. They tell him it is the Black Cat, and he goes his way to go find the thief. When Spider-Man finds her, he breaks into her home. But the Black Cat is not worried about that. She then notices the Spider-Man, and Spider-Man has her and tells her that her days are over. She then smirks at him and growls because she thinks this is a game. Spider-Man then says the jig is up and web slings her. She, of course, dodges the web effortlessly and flips her hair. Then she slashes Peter right in his face. Peter then takes off his mask and looks at her crazy. She then sees his beautiful face and she wants a piece of Peter. Peter is confused. He's like, wait, aren't you a villain? But then he leaves and then she follows him. She chases him across the city and seduces Peter. They then get close again and they start to talk about their kiss that they had. They then became even closer and started to talk even more about the kisses that they had. They then got even closer and Peter tells her, would you stop being a villain for him? That's the only way he would love her. And she says yes. So day in and day out they hang out more and more and more. They really start to grow very close together. They even shared a ride, a route of kisses. Even more kisses and more than that. She even met Aunt May. Felicia was a part of the family. But all that changed in one night. The next day came about. We then see Peter and Felicia in bed. Peter wakes up and he's just staring at Felicia while she sleeps. He then thinks to himself, how did he get in this situation? He falls back asleep and then has a dream about him and Gwen. Some time has passed and Peter wakes up from that dream to the smell of delicious breakfast made by Felicia. He enters the kitchen fully dressed as Spider-Man. Felicia then questions him on why he is dressed up in his superhero suit. He should be sitting down and he should eat. He then tells her, nah, he has to go. He has things to do. She tells him, is there anyone else? And he says, no, there isn't anyone else. And then he leaves. Felicia then watches Peter leave the premise and watches him for a while. She then breaks down because she knows that there's someone else. Peter is web-slinging about his way throughout the city as he normally does. He then comes to a stop and looks at the city view and goes and finds some bad guys. He does this as he usually does, takes out the bad guys, helps the people. He later then takes out some more bad guys and some more bad guys. After that, Peter then web slings away. Peter's spider senses then start to tingle. He sees a vicious, odd, powerful dog. It goes for a human and tries to eat him. Spider-Man then lands to the scene and the dog chases right after him. Peter web slings the dog and beats him in a fight quickly. The blackness slithers away unknowingly, and the dog is free from the clutch of the symbiote. Peter then goes home and falls asleep, only to find that the symbiote had bonded to him while he was in the alley unknowingly. 2 hours later, we enter the Daily Bugle, and Peter is there with James, about to get ready to go take some pictures at the Spider-Man festival. James tells him to get some good shots, and Peter says okay. Peter gets there, and he's taking pictures of all kinds of things. The festival is very nice. We then have Peter snatching a bunch of good photos. A woman sees him from a distance and approaches him. She asks if he could take some pictures of her. He, of course, replies happily, and he gets a very good photo of the woman. They then hang out and start to have a really good time together in the festival. But while they're having their fun, they are being watched by Felicia. After the festival, Peter returns to the Daily Bugle. He then conversates and asks for a raise, and James tells him there is no raise in his eyes. He then shows him the photos, and James gets happy. He pays him his money and gives him $100 extra. After that, we enter the college once more. It's a pretty nice setting. The students are everywhere. It's pretty local. It is pretty peaceful. Everyone is enjoying their day, even the ones in the lounge. But then we come outside and we find Peter looking through a window. The window is across the campus, and he is seeing none other than the beautiful Mary Jane Reed. Stunned by her beauty, all Peter could do was smile. He then walks away from where he was sitting and sort of gets closer to her building. She then comes out and says, "Hey Peter, how are you?" And he says, "I'm doing pretty good. How are you? Want to hang out?" And they, of course, hang out and have a good time together. It's now nighttime in downtown New York, and Peter is, of course, just watching over as he does. He then realizes that he smells bad, and he goes to the laundry room. After that, Peter then does his laundry and waits for his spider uniform to come out the washer. He then opens the washer and finds that there is no uniform inside. Peter wonders, how did that happen? He then put on his Spider-Man hoodie, his sweats, and his Jordan 1s, and he makes his way outside, only to find Venom rampaging through the city. Peter is blown away. He does not know what this is. And then the Venom starts coming towards Peter Parker as he tells him that he is a suitable candidate. They then get into a very crazy battle, and the Venom wins and escapes alongside of Peter Parker's suit. And then Peter walks away as he just got his ass kicked. He goes right back to the laundry room and opens up the washing machine. He then finds the black symbiote in there. Just a small piece. He gets freaked out because he doesn't know what this is. But then he gets the bright idea. It starts to flow all throughout his head. He then contains the symbiote and he takes it back to his home for experimentation. Peter Parker's intentions are to manipulate the symbiote. Peter's goal is quite simple. He just wants to manipulate the symbiote back into the suit that he used to fight the Scorpion with. And so he tries. He tests it on 5 spiders. They all die, and then he tries the Black Widow. He knows that this could possibly work because the Black Widow is a toxic spider. So now Peter starts his test. He places the symbiote in the spider tank, and it starts to bind into the Widow's DNA, thus creating the symbiote spider. After that, Peter was very pleased with the results. All he had to really do was keep the spider well fed, and he was able to harness the power of this spider. He places it within a tank, and whenever he wills, he puts it in the watch. This new watch that he developed is called the Spider Watch. It enables him to transform into different suits. Thus, the original suit, this black symbiote spider, and the white symbiote spider. Peter Parker then sits on top of a building and reflects, while the black cat watches him from a distance. She appears and asks Peter, where has he been? And Peter says he has been nowhere, just out. Obviously does not believe that. She questions Peter on his absence and wonders why he has been ignoring her. Peter's spider sense then tingles and he activates the spider watch in front of her. He then starts to transform and Felicia watches him seductively. Once he finishes his transformation, she runs up to him and kisses him, but then he pulls back and reverts into the white form. He then web slings away from her far, and then she finds him instantly and appears behind him. She then starts to question Peter on where this suit came from, and he tells her he developed this technology. She then appears behind him again and tells him he looks hot. He then tells her to leave him alone, and then Peter gets ready to web sling her. He says he must turn her in, and she thinks that this is a game. He then web slings her, and she slashes him once more, ripping off his mask. Peter is in shock, and then he web slings her one more time. She then dodges it and appears behind him. She is slick, and she asks Peter, where did he get this power? He tells her that it's none of her business and that she needs to leave. They are over with. And the heartbreak begins. The black cat says, okay, do you, boo? And Peter web slings out of there. She watches him as he leaves and then thinks to herself, what the hell just happened? She gets angry and her heart begins to blacken. But little does she know that the symbiote is coursing through her body. How? She then chokes up, and then it starts to spread throughout her face. She looks at her nails and realizes it was from the slashing she did. And then it started to spread all over her hand, transforming her more and more and more into a different person. And she makes her way to an apartment building and complex. Inside the home, she has Mary Jane in her clutches. She grabs her by her neck and threatens her about the situation. She then starts to beat her up, and Spider-Man swings into action. Once he lands there, he tells her to unhand the woman, and she gets mad and says, why would you do this to me, Peter? And then she gets angry and begins to transform more. They then have a crazy battle, and Mary Jane watches everything. Spider-Man, of course, wins the battle and beats the black cat, laying her out. Then she gets up out of nowhere and runs out of Mary Jane's apartment. After that, the apartment is thrashed and Mary Jane is just looking at her house. She then asks Spider-Man, is he Peter Parker? And she says that she heard her say that you're Peter Parker. She then asks him again, are you Peter Parker? And he says yes. He is Peter Parker, and takes off his mask. Mary Jane then begins to cry and tells him to get out of her house. She doesn't want to see him again. Peter is stunned, and she just says she just wants him to leave. And then he says okay, and Spider-Man goes his way. Mary Jane then sobs in her apartment. It is now 2 weeks later, and we see Peter Parker walking throughout the streets of New York. He then receives a phone call from the hospital. They tell him that his Aunt May is sick. He then starts to think to himself that it's all over. He's losing everything. He then goes to the hospital and sees Aunt May lying there, sick in bed. The nurse tells her that soon she's going to have to go to sleep. May then turns and tells Peter how much she loves him. Peter starts to sob, and Aunt May gets ready to take her medication while he's sobbing. She says, do not worry, the world needs him more than her. And she lies there after taking her inhaler. She then coughs a little and then falls asleep. Peter watches her and cries. 2 days after the hospital visit, Peter Parker wakes up in the morning. He then gets a phone call again from the hospital confirming Aunt May's death. Peter then sobs. 4 days have passed and Peter is visiting Aunt May's grave. He just sits there in the rain, thinking about how he lost everything. Out of nowhere, Mary Jane appears and says, hello, Peter. He then sits there and says, hey. She puts some flowers down and holds his hand. She hugs him and apologizes because she knows how hard his life must be. Peter then has a spider sense. What Peter sees is destruction everywhere, not too far from his location. He also sees the venom running and bursting through the streets and more buildings. It is a pretty sad event. Venom then gets to the top of a building and he yells for Peter Parker. Peter then tells Gwen he has to go. She then says, "Go get him, Tiger." And Peter smiles back at her. After that, he activates the new Spider Watch, puts on his Spider-Man uniform, and he goes about to the fight. 30 minutes after hunting down the Venom, he finally found him. The Venom then smiles and tells him, "Peter Parker, you are the only eligible vessel. Now your body must be mine." And he comes to Peter Parker full speed. Battle begins and it gets very intense. This is the harshest fight. Peter Parker then gets driven into a corner by Venom and he has him right where he wants him. He demasks him and then Peter Parker activates the black suit. Venom then gets very pissed and he starts to fight Spider-Man in the black suit. Very soon, Venom takes his symbiote power back from Spider-Man and now he unmasks him and he is ready to win. Spider-Man does his web motion 4 times in a row and it changes his DNA instantly, turning him into a red symbiote Spider-Man. Venom then gets afraid of the situation and he runs, cowering. Then Spider-Man catches him with the red webs and he completely kicks his ass. After that, Venom has been beaten to a pulp. He then reverts into a little puddle of black slime and then turns into black dust. Peter Parker then watches the situation and then he web slings off. After that, he lands on top of a building and watches Mary Jane. He then appears and she starts to cry and says that she thought she lost him. He then says he can't die, he's Spider-Man. She then smiles and says, "Yes, you're right," and then gives him a beautiful kiss, ending the Spider-Man movie. But during the end credit scenes, we go a year later, back to the planet Symbiote, and we see Carnage yelling for Venom. Hope you guys enjoyed. I thank you so much for watching.